When a bank became a battlefield, it started as a disagreement, the kind that should have faded with time. But instead it grew, fueled by pride, fear, and the unspoken truth that money has a way of turning rivals into enemies. Before long, the bank was no longer just an institution. It was the arena where a nation settled its deepest grudges. To understand why this conflict still matters, we have to step into a moment when America was expanding faster than anyone expected. New territories opened, trade routes multiplied, and ambition swept across the country like a fever. Yet beneath that sweeping momentum, cracks in the financial system widened. Ordinary people struggled through cycles of boom and collapse. Politicians argued about the balance of power, and the bank, once a symbol of stability, became the focus of resentment from those who believed it wielded too much influence. This wasn't just about interest rates or currency. It was about control. Who decided the fate of the economy, who benefited when markets surged, and who suffered when speculation pushed prices beyond reason. The bank stood at the center of this storm, admired by some, despised by others, and feared by nearly everyone who understood its reach. Then came the spark that ignited the fire. A bold leader stepped onto the stage, convinced that the bank had grown into something dangerous. He believed it had become an institution beyond accountability, a force capable of shaping the destiny of the nation without ever facing the judgment of the people. His accusations hit with a force that stunned both critics and supporters. Suddenly, the quiet unease surrounding the bank erupted into a public confrontation. What followed wasn't a policy debate. It was a clash of visions. On one side stood those who saw the bank as the backbone of American growth, a vital tool for navigating the chaos of expanding markets. On the other side stood those who viewed it as a threat to democracy, a mechanism that handed unprecedented power to a select few. The revelation that this institution might be influencing political alliances only deepened the distrust. In the early stages of the conflict, subtle moves took place behind closed doors. Letters circulated, speeches sharpened, supporters gathered strength while opponents prepared for a fight that neither side believed they could afford to lose. Every development added weight to the growing tension, and soon the entire country felt pulled into the struggle. The bank was no longer an abstract concept. It had become a battleground where the future of American power would be contested, and the first blows had only just been struck. The conflict escalated faster than anyone expected. What had begun as a political disagreement now seeped into daily life, shaping conversations in homes, markets, and meeting halls. People sensed that something far larger was unfolding beneath the surface. And while many didn't fully grasp the mechanics of the bank, they understood one thing clearly. Power was shifting, and no one knew where it would land. The bank's defenders struck back with a confidence sharpened by decades of influence. They argued that without a central institution, the economy would fracture into regional chaos. They warned that dismantling it would jeopardize the progress the nation had fought so hard to build. Their speeches framed the bank not just as an institution, but as a guardian, one that protected the country from its own volatility. But critics heard something different, a claim to authority that sounded dangerously close to entitlement. Meanwhile, the opposition refused to retreat. They painted the bank as an elite fortress, a place where decisions were made far from the voices of ordinary citizens. They spoke of farmers trapped in debt cycles, merchants squeezed by policies they didn't vote for, and politicians who appeared tethered to financial interests rather than the people they served. Their message resonated with those who felt forgotten, fueling a populist surge that spread with surprising speed. In quiet offices and candlelit parlors, the struggle intensified. Reports emerged suggesting that the bank might be influencing elections, shaping campaigns, and guiding outcomes with unseen hands. Whether these claims were fully true or cleverly exaggerated didn't matter. The doubt was enough. The institution's reputation, once solid, began to crack under the pressure of suspicion. Behind the scenes, strategic moves unfolded. Allies traded favors. Enemies leaked letters. Each side maneuvered to seize a narrative before the other could. The country found itself split between two powerful visions. One fighting to preserve the financial stability they believed the bank ensured, and the other determined to dismantle an institution they saw as a threat to democracy. As fear and ambition intertwined, the stakes rose to a dangerous height. Newspapers amplified every accusation. Small disagreements turned into bitter rivalries. And though no shots were fired, the atmosphere felt like a nation preparing for battle. The early conflict began twisting into something more personal, more emotional, and far more unpredictable. And through it all, one question grew louder. If the bank truly held this much power, what would happen when someone finally tried to break it? Pressure continued to build, and soon the conflict reached a point where compromise no longer seemed possible. What began as a political dispute had transformed into a struggle that touched every layer of American life. Supporters and opponents were no longer debating ideas. They were defending identities, futures, and visions of what the nation should become. The president at the center of the storm refused to back down. His speeches grew sharper, his conviction harder. He framed the bank as a looming danger, a force capable of manipulating elections, controlling credit, and bending policy for its own survival. In his eyes, it had crossed a line no institution should ever cross. And for millions who felt ignored by the political elite, his words rang true. They saw in him a champion willing to confront a power they believed had grown too bold. Across the country, crowds gathered to hear his warnings. Farmers who had struggled under waves of debt, laborers who distrusted distant institutions, citizens who felt overshadowed by coastal wealth. Their frustration fed the momentum, transforming political rhetoric into a movement. They didn't want reform, they wanted a reckoning, but the bank refused to yield. Its leaders believed they were protecting the country from disaster. To them, the president's crusade was reckless, a threat to everything the fragile economy depended on. They insisted the nation needed a strong financial backbone, and they viewed themselves as that backbone. Their statements grew defiant, their support from influential merchants and lawmakers stronger. The conflict hardened into two immovable forces. Reports of behind-the-scenes strategies began surfacing. Bank officials allegedly funneled funds to political opponents, hoping to block the president's attempts to weaken their influence. Advisors whispered about retaliatory measures, about using financial pressure to sway public opinion. Even if some of these claims were exaggerated, the atmosphere of suspicion smothered any chance for trust to return. The markets reacted to every speech, every rumor, every letter. Prices swung. Businesses hesitated. Ordinary people watched their livelihoods twist in the turbulence created by arguments they barely understood. And yet, they felt the consequences as clearly as if the debates were happening in their own homes. The emotional tension rose with each passing week. The conflict seeped into conversations between friends, strained alliances, and threatened to split the nation into two irreconcilable visions. One side believed the president was fighting for democracy. The other believed he was dismantling the foundation of American stability. Neither could imagine stepping back. And all the while, a troubling realization crept across the country. No matter who won, the cost would be immense. Trust was already eroding. Markets were already shaking. And the center of power, once firm and unquestioned, was beginning to fracture under the weight of the struggle. The buildup was now undeniable. The battle lines were drawn so deeply that retreat seemed impossible. Everyone sensed that a dramatic turning point was coming, and that nothing would look the same once it arrived. The breaking point arrived not with violence, but with a choice that shocked the nation. After months of speeches, accusations, and escalating distrust, the president made his move. He announced that government funds would be withdrawn from the bank, stripping it of the lifeblood it relied on. It was a declaration of war delivered in the calmest possible tone. The consequences were immediate. The bank's leaders reacted with outrage, calling the decision reckless and destructive. Supporters warned that the financial system could collapse. Opponents celebrated, convinced that the president had finally taken the bold action they'd been waiting for. But beneath the cheering and panic, one truth stood out. The balance of power had shifted, and there was no going back. The nation held its breath as the conflict entered its climax. The bank fought to survive, but the blow had been too severe. Its influence weakened. Its allies dwindled. Its critics, once hesitant, grew confident. And slowly, the institution that had once stood as an untouchable pillar began to crumble under the weight of the president's determination. When the dust settled, the bank's fate was sealed. The war that had consumed the nation ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with a gradual fading of power. The institution dissolved, leaving behind a vacuum that would shape the economic battles of the decades to come. Some saw the outcome as a victory for democracy. Others feared it marked the beginning of instability the nation wasn't prepared to confront. In the quiet that followed, Americans reflected on what had happened. They realized that money is never just money. It's influence. It's trust. It's a force that can bind a nation together or pull it apart. The resolution left more questions than answers, reminding everyone that even the most powerful institutions are fragile when tested by the will of a determined people. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.